Hi everyone, and welcome to the video presentation for Module 22. This module will be analyzing music with the new harmonies we've been talking about in the past unit, which include dominant chords with a sixth added instead of the fifth, a dominant chord with a raised fifth degree to make it an augmented chord, dominant chords with extensions added, such as the 9, 13th, and sometimes 11, and also the common tone diminished seventh chord. So after we watch this, we'll understand how to identify these things in actual music and how to analyze them as well. So let's dive into it. So the first example in the book is this Humoresque by Robert Schumann, Opus 20. Before we start, we want to look at the key of this excerpt. And it looks like it is in B flat because we have two flats, and not really, but we do start off with this F sharp accidental at the beginning. And it looks like the first stable harmony we end up with is an E flat chord. So you might be tempted to think that this might be in the key of E flat, but I think if we look all the way ahead to our last chord here, it looks like it ends on a B flat. So let's compare what this looks like, where it looks like it ends on B flat. Let's compare that to how it sounds when we listen to it. Now this is a very short excerpt, so we'll play this a couple times. Okay, let's listen to that one more time. So I think it sounds like it does end on that B flat chord. That sounds like the tonic harmony. So we'll go with that. So even though we don't get a true B flat chord until the very end, almost 5 measures in, we're still going to analyze it like it is in the key of B flat. So let's dive into analyzing this. Okay, so why don't we start at the end, since we know that that is our 1 chord in our key of B flat. So we'll go ahead and mark that here. So this ends on a 1 chord. You can see that it has B flat in the bass, F, another B flat, a D, and then a B flat in the melody there. If we look 1 back, we would expect a 5 chord, a dominant harmony, to lead to a 1 chord. And so our harmony here is F, another F, an A, an E flat, and a C. So that creates a 5-7 chord. So we have a 5-7 to 1 progression. Okay. Now, we do want to identify any non-chord tones, and there is a little one here, and that is the fact that this grace note is to the left of the bar line, which means it happens while the 5-7 is sounding. So we could identify this, B flat, as a non-chord tone, and we'd call it an anticipation because it anticipates the B flat that comes in the 1 chord following this. Okay. So now we could look at the chord before that too. So we have an F, again in the bass. Now it could be a 5-7, but we'll see that we have a B flat, a D, an F, and then a D again. So this is a 1-6-4. So we have a very conventional 1-6-4-5-1 progression. Okay. The chord that comes before that is in, let's see, we have an E flat, a C, an E flat, a G, and an E flat. So that looks like a C minor chord with an E flat in the bass. So we'll analyze that as a 2 in our key of B flat, a 2-6, since it's first inversion, which, that's a subdominant chord, which leads to a dominant harmony, which is what this 1-6-4-5-7 is, which leads to 1. So far we have predominant to dominant to a 1 chord, which all makes sense. Okay, now we get into the chromatic chord. So let's look at the chord that precedes this 2-6 chord. So we have a D in the bass. It looks like the next note up from that D would be an F. So I'm going to write this out on the staff. So we have D, F. The next note up would be an A flat, which is up here in the right hand. And then we have the note B natural as well. So if we rearrange that, this chord in root position would be B natural, D, F, A flat, which is a fully diminished seventh chord. So this is a secondary fully diminished seventh chord, a fully diminished leading tone chord of 2/6, because that B natural is the leading tone of C. So this will be our 7 fully diminished, and this is also in first inversion, 6 of 2 of C minor. Okay, so a first chromatic chord. That chord makes it sound like that 2/6 is the tonic temporarily, right? Because it's a secondary function chord, a tonicization of that 2 chord. Okay. All right, let's look at this next one. So here we have an E flat in our bass, and then the next note up would be the note, looks like F would actually be the next note up, because that's up here on the right hand. Then an A, then a C. So if I played this, it sounds like this, which is a 5/4/2. So that's an F chord, F7 chord with the 7th in the bass, 5/4/2 in the key of B flat. Okay, so that interestingly does not lead to 1. Instead, it leads to our 7 fully diminished 6 of 2. And it does that because of the voice leading, mainly that E flat moving down to the D, right? So it's almost like kind of like a deceptive cadence in some ways. But anyway, it's a 5/4/2 that does not lead to a 1. And now the chord before that, we have an E flat, a B flat, a G, another B flat, and a G. So to me, that looks like a 4 chord, an E flat major chord. So let's label that as that. So we're setting up this expectation of predominant, right, 4, leading to a dominant 4/2, but then we have, almost like a deceptive cadence, which, in this 5/4/2 moves to some of the notes that belong in the key of B flat, right, in the chord B flat, but it doesn't actually get to all of them, right? And it also introduces the B natural and the A flat, which are, things that lead to another predominant harmony. So it's like we're extending the time, the time it takes to get to the 1 chord, because we have all these dominant harmonies, but we're not using them to actually get to the 1 chord yet. Okay, so we've identified all of these chords. Now let's look at this very first one. And it's a little bit tricky because if we think about it, this chord is actually, it's D in the bass, but the next note up would actually be an F sharp, and then a B flat. So if we put this in root position, we'd have a B flat, a D, and then an F sharp. So an augmented triad, and we don't normally have augmented triads. So we'll just put a plus here to make sure that we remember it's augmented. Now we have to look at what the voices are doing in order to figure out what this chord is. Okay? And so that F sharp is resolving to become the 3rd of the next chord. And that's probably the most important thing that's happening. And the D is resolving up by a step to become the E flat of the next chord. And the B is sustaining, the B flat's sustaining. So we have an augmented triad with a raised 5th degree that leads up to the 3rd of the next chord. So if we just analyze this with what's here, we could very well call this a 1 augmented, but that doesn't really explain how it works, right? Because that's sort of just a random augmented chord. It doesn't really tell us where it's going, right? So instead we have to acknowledge what the function of this chord is. And since, we've been talking about 5 augmented chords, it's okay to call this, and it should be called, a 5 augmented, right? But not of B flat, right? So this is a 5 augmented of a 4 chord. So it's a secondary dominant 5, but it's augmented, which leads to the 4 chord. And that's how you explain that F sharp, okay? And again, that fits into the scheme of delaying as long as possible the arrival on the 1 chord. And this is kind of a staple of the high romantic style of music, where, in classical traditional stuff we've been learning about theory, you usually start with a pretty clear statement of the 1 chord, right? Well, here and in music of this era, we often don't get a clear statement of the 1 chord. In fact, part of the philosophy of, composers in this era was to delay how long it takes and to hide the actual 1 chord. And we can see that happening here. So right off the bat, we get something that technically does have the root of a 1 chord, but it's in first inversion, and it has a raised 5th scale degree, so we would never really hear it as a 1 chord, right? Even though it is a 1 chord. Instead, it's treated as the 5 augmented of 4, which leads to 4, which leads to 5, which we would expect to lead to 1, but it doesn't. Instead, that we get that deceptive resolution to our secondary leading tone chord, right? Oh, and I should fix that. That's actually not a 6, is it? It's a 6-5. Sorry about that. 7th chord of 2, which leads to our predominant. Then we get our dominant chords, and we finally end up on 1, but we don't get there until, bar 5. So a little bit of a different philosophy, kind of starting off in a mysterious harmonic area and not really revealing what the 1 is until the last possible moment. Okay. Well, great. If you have any questions about this, we'll be going over some more examples in our Zoom session. And yeah, that's it. So thanks for watching and have a great day.